All right, good afternoon, and thank you all for being with us this afternoon. My name is Terri Roberts-Leonard. I am Carmel Clay School's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Thank you for joining us for this session in our Courageous Conversations series. This series aims to inspire dialogue, community engagement, and civic education. Speakers will include scholars, community members and leaders, and diversity professionals whose scholarship, leadership, and advocacy enhance the school system's efforts to present diverse viewpoints, ideas, and perspectives, and to inspire greater understanding and appreciation for inclusive excellence. Towards the end of this event, we will provide you with an assessment link in the chat so that you can provide feedback and let us know what other topics are of interest to you. Just to clear one thing up, this is a Zoom webinar, so participants will not see your video of yourself. You will only see the video of the panelists, who are the people on the screen. So you should be able to see 8 people screened right now. You can, however, still type in the chat box. Today's event is in panel discussion format, in which we will talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in general, but also in Carmel specifically. We invite you to utilize the Zoom features, the question and answer key at the bottom, as well as the chat, in order to submit questions that you would like to ask as well. So we're going to start by having all of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves and share their name and relationship to CCS and to Carmel. So we will start, and let's make sure that everybody's unmuted here. We will start with James Ziegler.
Yeah, so I'm James Ziegler. My pronouns are he, him, his. I teach at Carmel High School, and I am also the sponsor of the Black Student Alliance at Carmel High School. And then I'm also a COO of a local social justice organization, Communities for Allied for Racial Equity as well. So that's a little bit about me and my connections to the community here.
Shandy Walker.
Yes, I'm Shandy Walker. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a special education teacher at one of the elementary schools in Carmel Clay Schools, and I have 3 students that attend as well.
Thank you. Brittany Coates.
Hi, good afternoon. I am Brittany Coates. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am a school social worker in the district.
Thank you. Carmela Sparrow.
Hi, my name is Carmela Sparrow. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm a teacher for IPS charter school, and I also work. I'm a colleague with James. We are together with Communities Allied for Racial Equity, and I have 2 babies, and I call them babies, but they're 3rd graders now. 3rd grade at Woodbrook Elementary.
Thank you. Lindsay Mintz.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lindsay Mintz, and my pronouns are she and hers. I am a member of the Jewish community and live in Carmel. I'm the executive director of the Jewish Community Relations Council, which is the Jewish community's intergroup, interfaith, public policy arm. And I have 3 kids, 1 at Town Meadow and 2 at Creekside.
Tyson Smith.
Hi, I'm Tyson Smith. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am a 4th grade teacher at West Clay Elementary School. And I am also was a member of, there's a gay softball league in Indianapolis, and I was a board member for that division for 10 years.
Awesome. And Morgan Blakely.
Hi, I'm Morgan Blakey. I am a senior at Carmel High School. Also at Carmel High School, I am the co-founder and co-president of the Black Student Alliance at our school. And also I am a Justice for Black Girls ambassador. So.
All right, thank you all very much. So what we're going to do is we're just going to throw out some questions there, then we will just have a conversation like we're on Oprah's Super Soul Sunday or something, right? We're just having a conversation. amongst colleagues and friends. All right. So we'll start off in just asking, how do you think topics such as racism, sexism, ageism, ableism, anti-Semitism, how do you think those have an impact on the city of Carmel? And anyone can jump in. Now everybody's shy at the beginning, right? So we'll start with who's unmuted. Shandy, what do you think?
Well, I think the easiest way to say that it's impacts it is because we have all of those groups in the community. So, I mean, they're all represented here. So being able to show that we support all of those groups and that we allow them in our community and we support them in our community, I think is the easiest place to start.
I'll add on to Shandy's comments. Of course, it matters to Carmel, it matters to every community because of the reasons Shandy noted, and that these are issues that people are dealing with, whether you hear them and see them dealing with that or not. And as a community, we should all be willing and able to come together and to support and to figure out ways that we can help people who are dealing with any issues as a racism, sexism, ageism, ableism, all of those things. And so every community is dealing with it. And it's just, you know, are we being active? Or are we being, preventive and active? Or are we being reactive? And I'm hoping that Carmel wants to be a community where we can be proactive and really help people on the front end instead of being reactive.
Yeah, and I think just expanding on that as well, if we don't support DEI initiatives and making sure that people feel included and welcome, you know, it then kind of sends the message to people both in our community and outside our community that we don't find value in people who are different than us, and that we don't feel like by engaging with them that we're losing out on anything, which is the farthest thing from the truth in reality, and also will have a dramatic impact in preventing our community from reaching its full potential. Communities that don't embrace DEI lose out on, you know, the best and the brightest who could bring new ideas, could bring new businesses to those communities. So, you know, I think the DEI work and, you know, embracing people of diverse backgrounds has massive implications for our city as in order to help it reach its full potential.
Yeah, I can sort of piggyback off of what James said. I think it was in 2015, Carmel passed the ordinance, the anti-discrimination ordinance. And I know that was big for the gay community because people, like James said, felt valued and felt safe. I know where I used to work, I didn't feel safe there because, you know, you hear of teachers all the time being let go or fired for being gay. When Carmel passed that, I was like, oh my goodness, I need to apply for a job there because I feel safer there working there, knowing that I can't be fired for, you know, being gay or being married to a man or whatnot. And so I think that was huge for Carmel to do and put it in the news and whatnot, because it really showed that they want to grow their community and make it more open.
I'll add, and of course say I agree with everybody before me. I think it's as much about acknowledging and recognizing and being very intentional about naming and seeing all of the people who make up our community so that we can get the most out of everybody. And that's definitely one part of it. But when I think of a school district, of the role of educators and social workers and administrators interacting with students who are learning how to navigate the world, I think DEI, if it's done well and thoughtfully and really broadly, at the very core is this idea of growing empathy, of understanding, of listening, and for many people who may just see, you know, DEI initiatives as like the latest thing or a box to check, it's really needs to be an intentional endeavor by everybody, whether you're in a group, you know, that might be identified or not, even more so, if not, I think for some to get those skills of listening, of asking questions, of learning to not just understand somebody else's experience, but then to value how it contributes to a community and a society that, you know, values pluralism is a stronger community.
I want to give the attendees an opportunity to participate in the chat. So a lot of times people will say that diversity, equity, and inclusion work is scary to them. So the topics come up, they get really tense, they get really nervous for various reasons. So go ahead and drop in the chat why you think that is. Why do you think that it may be something that you're fearful of or people that you know are fearful of? And then while they're doing that, we want to go ahead and get some answers for some of our panelists. Brittany, what do you think? Why do you think DEI is so scary to some people?
I would say DEI is very scary to people because we don't talk about it as much. And if there are things that are happening in life and we don't talk about it, people automatically get that feeling of, well, it's something that we shouldn't talk about or that I'm not allowed to talk about it. And Lindsay said a word, use the word intentional. And if we are very intentional as to make that something that is going to be a situation or a topic that we talk about more often, people will get more comfortable with it. I also think that people get nervous about it because there are a lot of times where situations and conversations can become a little bit heated when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it doesn't need to be something that has to always be a heated discussion. But the way that we become more comfortable about that is talking more about it. And then we will be able to see that we can be comfortable having those discussions with people or knowing who we can go to have those discussions. It is very important to be intentional about person, place, and time, right? That we're having these discussions and making sure that we are being intentional, that it is going to be an appropriate time to have those, but knowing that it is also important that we do have those conversations.
Morgan, what do you think? In the school, in the high school, do you think that people think it's scary?
Yeah, I think some teachers think that it's scary to talk about those different things, or they really try to avoid them, due to the fact that they don't really want to say the wrong thing or they don't know how to approach it. But I mean, you kind of have to step out, just and talk about it, because you have students of color in there who that's important to them, but and if you're just kind of ignore it the whole time, it kind of makes it seem like it's not important to you and that you really don't care about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I think that's really important, and that helps to make school districts even better and help with the training. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we had some answers in the chat. Let me scroll up here. Somebody said fearful of saying the wrong thing that may offend others. That is the number one thing over my career in diversity, equity, and inclusion that people say. They say, I don't want to say something, somebody get upset, or I get fired, or somebody's mom is calling me, whatever it may be. They're just very fearful of, saying the wrong thing, even with good intentions. People think that acknowledging differences is a bad thing, somebody said. That is absolutely correct. So that's where you get into the people when they say, I don't see color, and they are, well-intentioned in thinking that is a good thing, right? But what they really is trying to say is that I treat people well. I'm not racist or whatever it may be, but we need people to see color because that is part of the person, right? That doesn't mean that you have to treat them wrong, and being a different color is not a bad thing. So absolutely. Again, they're also afraid of saying something wrong. They disagree with the concept and don't want to tell people. Yeah, a lot of times people say, I don't find a place for myself in a conversation, but it's important for us to know and be intentional, like Lindsay said, and let people know that this is for everybody. It's really not helping us if we're just talking to ourselves all the time, or people who agree with us 100% of the time, right? People might feel that they're ignorance, maybe asking the wrong questions or making assumptions will cause them harm. It can be scary because it potentially forces people out of their comfort zones. Absolutely. People say, I'm fearful I will unintentionally offend or use the wrong words. The terms are often undefined. Those who have been engaging in the DEI space for many years are typically the ones who lead in a way, and there's a whole vocabulary and language. That is an excellent point. And something that I do as a trainer is typically when I'm doing foundational trainings, I try to have that vocabulary at the beginning so that we kind of have that shared language going in. So that is definitely a good point, and definitely something that trainers should be doing when they're doing educational sessions.
Terri, I don't know, would jump in, just one other thing to add, like from a teacher's perspective in the classroom and talking with colleagues as well. You know, I think sometimes there's this fear like, all right, as teachers, we have to remain neutral politically, right? But I would argue that civil rights are human rights and should be apolitical issues that people are not afraid to engage in. And so I think that's a big thing, is making sure that teachers also feel empowered to have these conversations, that you're not promoting a political agenda, you are promoting human rights and inclusion by having these conversations. And I think too, sometimes people just fear that if you start promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, that somehow that's negatively going to impact their rights that they already have, which is also, I think, like the opposite of, again, what it does. We all do better when we all do better is kind of how I look at it. So just a couple other things I'd tack on there too.
Yes, you don't have to tear anybody down to lift somebody up, right?
That's so important. I think maybe we'll get to this at some point, but the idea of intersectionality really resonates today. And I think that there's a lot of really powerful ways that it can be applied and thought of. But I think for some people, it feels like those conversations might leave them out, or it sort of ranks, you know, I've heard it called the oppression Olympics. And if I am not up here, you know, so there are times when some people need to not center themselves and some people need to wait to speak. I think that there's an incredible value in that. But I also want to push for all of those people who find the space, the safe space to step out. As you said, Morgan, you know, the first part is stepping out and speaking. It's also incumbent on the person who you're speaking with, and this goes in both directions, to listen with a lot of humility, you know, and grace. Because if people are going to learn and learn out loud and learn publicly, then the other person in the conversation needs to have a little bit of grace too. So it's got to be mutually safe and beneficial. And then I think we get to that, you know, more is more for everybody place.
And having that grace is really important, because like with the fear that I think that we all have is that I'm going to say something wrong. And the fact is that we are going to say something wrong. We are not going to get it right every single time. And with the grace of being able to say, you know, just be honest and say, you hurt my feelings, or you made me feel this way because you said or did this. And sometimes when people say that, we may not get defensive, but sometimes we get defensive, or we want to prove like, oh, I'm sorry, that's not what I meant. And which is fine, like you had good intentions, but taking that next step to listen and say, okay, what was it that I said or that I did that did offend you? So that the next time that we're put in a similar situation or conversation, we can learn from our past experiences to hopefully make a different decision the next time.
Can I use a real world situation? I'm going to put James on the spot just a little bit, but we've been working together all year. So when I first met him, he used the term minority. And I know other people who don't like that term. For me, it means less than, and I know it means statistically less than, but in America, we speak in code. And so I don't prefer that term. And so I spoke to him about why, et cetera, and he handled it so gracefully. And she's like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. Thanks for letting me know that. And he listened to what I had to say. And, you know, we have a great relationship. And so just not being afraid to, like you guys said, to speak and to say what it is. And then, you know, like I think Brittany said, having grace on the other end and saying, you know, not feeling like, oh, this person's an awful person. I didn't think that when James said that. I just thought, okay, maybe he's misinformed or he doesn't know this. So let me just express this to him in a nice comfortable way, and we were able to have a conversation that was easy to have and move on from there and build from there. So
I was going to say there's such a that interaction then builds some trust where
exactly.
he can go back to you now and say, okay, I just had an interaction. I want to unpack it. Like when I'm in conversations with people who haven't spoken to somebody who's Jewish, or they have questions about the Jewish community or anti-Semitism, and one of the first things I say is, not only can you ask me anything, but I want to have this conversation in a way that you feel like you can come back to me again. You know, these aren't conversations to win. They're not to walk away, you know, beating your chest. They are to enable a second and third conversation. And I want to have that with people who are different than me too. That's, for me, that's where the biggest growth and learning comes from.
Yeah, to kind of go off of that, I was just, when people were talking, thinking about how it really takes like a compassion for each other and an understanding of maybe they didn't mean it that way. And if I'm open to talking to them about why I prefer a different language or how something may have offended me or someone else, if we have that mutual openness and mutual compassion, we can have those multiple conversations, and we can have that trust between the two of us, that I know that I can come to this person, and we can kind of trickle that on as we interact with others too.
Yeah, I think a good point too is I liked Carmela's example for a couple of reasons. And one reason is that one of the reasons why a lot of times people are nervous is because people are not monolithic, right? So there's plenty of people who I identify as people of color who don't mind the term minority, right? And so people have said to me, for example, like, oh my goodness, I said this to this person, it was okay, but I said this to this person and they were upset, and then they get all nervous and things like that. So I think remembering that people are not monolithic, and that's why it's important to develop those relationships like Carmela and James have, right? Because then you're able to ask people, you know, what do you prefer? How do you like to be called? And things like that. I think that that's very, very, very important.
Can I add that as well? And just say that even people in DEI work, like I'm in DEI work, we struggle with that. Like we have to ask people as well. So an example is when the term, you know, Latinx came up. You know, from some people, I was like, I thought like, okay, this is the term we use now. And then some of my friends were like, no, I prefer Hispanic. I was like, okay. So now I got to a place where it's like, I ask people, what do you prefer? And they tell me, and each person tells me something different. And I try to remember. So we even have to, we're always learning, we're always growing. And that's as people who are embedded in this work.
Absolutely. I think that is a really great point. I was actually talking to some people today and letting them know, like you take, for example, very popular people like Michael Eric Dyson and then Ibram X. Kendi. They have very different views, if you read their things, and they both have huge followings, both New York best-selling books multiple times and high statuses and jobs, but they have very, very different views on things, right? So there's not necessarily one answer, and I think that's what makes people nervous about DEI. Is it's not 2 + 2 is 4, right? Okay, in the chat we have somebody says, aren't people afraid there are also costs, not just benefits to DEI? He's centering the question of whether people perceive costs, which as DEI professionals is assuming something you have to deal with, and does have examples. I'm not 100% sure I'm following the question. If you could give me a little more context, we'll try to get that answered for you. Somebody wants to take a stab at that. But our next question is, how can we understand how our behavior affects others? And why is that important? Brittany, what do you think? Oh, Morgan, go ahead.
I guess I was gonna say, like, in terms of like in the classroom, I say like, especially if you're talking about like topics over like, you know, LGBTQ plus, or talking about different things that involve like people of color, or anything just, you know, involving things of that nature. Like, I feel like, especially if you're like a teacher or a staff member, like you should make sure that you are like actively participating in the discussion or actively like being involved, because like sometimes you'll see like teachers who are just like, like, man, like, we really don't care, like, and then you're just kind of like, okay, so this person kind of doesn't care. And it kind of just like, resonates with like those people, like the LGBTQ plus or people, students of color, and like kind of resonates, and, it makes us feel like, okay, that teacher doesn't really care about these topics or these issues that much. And it kind of makes you feel some type of way, because, you see this teacher as someone who you can like kind of look up to, or someone that's kind of like a leader in the classroom, basically. And so when that teacher doesn't value those aspects of, being a person, like being somebody who's a student of color, then like it kind of just like cuts that off, and that makes you really want to interact with that teacher, I would say.
Tyson, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's important because I think you need to be a role model in the community. I know when I first started in Carmel, I was very, I don't know if closeted is the right word, but I was like, I'm not going to tell anybody I'm gay. I don't want anybody in Carmel to know I'm gay. And then I sort of, you get to know your coworkers and you get to know the ones who are comfortable with it and aren't comfortable with it. And then you slowly, I guess, introduce yourself or whatnot. But then as times have changed, that was 6 years ago. I think it's much more important for you to be, on, not on display is the right term, but, to show people that you're there and that you're comfortable and whatnot, and that they can come to you and talk to you about it if they, need to.
And I'd agree. I think really engaging in conversations with different groups. I think one of the issues in American society is we are still such a hyper segregated society in so many different facets of life. And because of that, it sometimes prevents us from engaging in conversations with groups of people that are different from us, whether it's racially, ethnically, religiously, in terms of gender identity, whatever it might be. And if you don't have conversations and interact with other people, then a lot of times you end up making decisions based on false information or stereotypes. And that certainly, has negative impacts on individual relationships, society as a whole, and, would hinder your ability to understand how your behavior affects others. So I think opening up a dialogue with people that are different than you, making sure you're putting yourselves in positions to do so too, not living in a bubble of just your community, going out and seeking out friendships of different groups. And again, showing that you understand the value of that, and then just being really self-reflective too. If something does make you feel uneasy, why does that make you feel uneasy? And how can your uneasiness maybe contribute to the problem that's, going on too? So just a few other things I'd add as well.
Some of those behaviors are also assumptions, right? I know, being a DEI professional and having been in this work for over a decade, many people make many assumptions about me. They assume that I'm not Christian. I am Christian. My daddy was a deacon, right? About as Christian as you can get. You assume that I am a member of the LGBT community. I'm not. They assume that they make just a lot of assumptions, and it shouldn't matter either way, right? But they just make these specific assumptions because they tie that into DEI work. And I think that is dangerous, because then that kind of imparts the thought that DEI isn't for everyone. It's only for these particular people or these particular groups or people who identify in a particular way. So I think that that's really important to make sure, kind of as James was saying, that we're not taking those assumptions and kind of running with that, as that is a behavior as well. I want to hit some of these comments. I'm loving all the comments. Someone said, I guess I can read this out loud, listen to panelists. I'm reading Charles' question as something James said, as people mistakenly thinking there are finite resources that for some to benefit from DEI, there are costs or losses to others. I do not agree with this at all, but this sentiment was part of the opinion posted in Current a few weeks ago. I think what James was getting at, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, James, is that oftentimes people think because we may see statistics and one group of students are struggling in a certain area. And so we try to help those students that's taking away from other students. And that's not necessarily it's not the case, right? I was actually speaking with some parents today and with Ann Arroyo, who is our director of curriculum, just wonderful, wonderful lady. And she was saying, we are lucky that we have a lot of resources in Carmel. So we are not in a situation where we have to take resources away from one group in order to provide resources to another group. And equity is about giving every student what they need to succeed. So that doesn't mean that a high achieving student with a lot of parental support, that we don't support them as well. We give them all the support that student needs. But what that student may need may be very different than what another student may need. So just to try to clear that up. Somebody said the classroom should be a safe place for these conversations to take place. How do we advocate for diverse groups in our classrooms without singling out certain groups? That's a good question. What do you think about that one? How do we advocate for diverse groups in our classrooms without singling out certain groups?
I'm a teacher, and I'm talking about diverse groups all the time. And for me, it's been talking about different groups all the time. So if you're just sticking on one group, then that can seem like, okay, are we only talking about Black people here? Are we only talking about like Latinx or Hispanic people? But if you're talking about Black people over here, Hispanic people over here, the Asian community over here, Arabic, we were learning about the Arabic community the other day. Then it becomes so normal to them, like, oh, okay, we're talking about everyone and we're learning about everyone. And they really enjoy learning about all the different groups and making those connections. And we talk about different celebrities that they know. And it's like, oh, I didn't know he was Arabic. It's like, yeah, he's like one of my favorite rappers. Like, yeah. And so they make those different connections and they feel more connected to that culture and to that history. And it doesn't make it seem like a us versus them. It's like, it's all of us. And so I think just talking about different groups all of the time and not just centering on one.
I'll share. I think that's huge, to just make it part of the culture and atmosphere of a classroom environment. Would be great if we had a magic wand to do that. But on the way to getting there, I think it's easy. It might be easy for teachers or the person standing at the front of the room. I'll just speak from the Jewish perspective. There are Jewish students, just like there are Muslim and Hindu and Sikh and Jewish students as well. And so it might be very easy for a teacher at the front of the room to say, oh, you're Jewish, so you can tell us about X, Y, or Z. And for some students, they might really want to do that and step into that space. For others, they don't. Knowing your classroom, knowing the place, the time, maybe having a conversation with the student first to say, we're going to be talking about this at some point. How do you feel, about me calling on you? Is there someone from your community that might be interested in zooming into our classroom? Or, so thinking ahead of time, I think is really important, because we have to be able to talk about different groups of people and their unique experiences, while all recognizing that we're all in this together moment that we need to have too, which is, more is more for everybody. And by listening to one doesn't mean we're not listening to another. By pausing your story for a moment doesn't lessen it. So all of those things need to be able to happen. But I think intentionality and thoughtfulness on the teacher's part can really help accidentally calling out a student that might not feel comfortable being called out.
I do think that the teacher should be kind of the central part in creating that culture. And I think it's important for teachers to do that, even if all of those cultures aren't in their classroom that year or that day, that it's always just a part of everything that they talk about. Like Carmela was saying, and all the time, all of the differences. And I mean, it can be disabilities too. Not all disabilities are apparent. We can't see them all. So being able to talk about how people handle things differently or their responses to things, family structures are different, and that might not be something that they see in the classroom or notice. So all of those things, making those topics a part of your everyday life, I think is important. And I think the teacher is the center of ensuring that that happens, so that kids know that those conversations can be positive and they feel safe to have them, because the kids are going to talk about it, whether adults talk about it or not. And I think the way that we keep it positive and for everyone to feel safe is if the teacher leads those.
And I think a big important part of that with feeling safe is relationships, or for teachers to have those relationships with students. So like somebody had said, that they can talk to a student beforehand and say, this is what we're going to talk about. I know that you may relate to this topic in some kind of way, or also that the teacher knows the students well enough to know there was just a topic that was discussed in class and I noticed you did not look normal like you normally do. You seem like maybe something was upsetting you. Are you okay? And having that follow-up conversation. But I also think that relationships can be built in the classroom and should be built in the classroom among peers and the teacher by having bell ringers or different activities that have nothing to do with the topic, just have everything to do with getting to know each other. Because if I know you and we've had good conversations, then I'm going to feel comfortable speaking up and sharing my truth and sharing my experiences with you, versus having all of these things in my head and in my heart that I want to share, but I'm worried of how I am going to be perceived if I do share this information. So I do feel like it starts, day one with just building that relationship and sense of community in individual classrooms, so that when these difficult conversations do come up, people feel that it's a safe place for them to discuss.
Yeah, and I would say just tech, and I agree with everything everybody was saying. And to echo Brittany, just we emphasize so much like SEL work in our district for the past few years, and SEL and DEI go hand in hand with each other. And so harvesting those conversations, those activities that Brittany mentioned, I think go a long way too. So.
Going to the chat, somebody sent a message to panelists talking about making a comment about the mental health of our students and the importance of that, and that is absolutely true. Someone says, how can we have these conversations in school with the worry / potential that some parents might be upset with the conversations that are happening? Everybody is different, right? We have 16,500 plus students or so in our system. So I would bet that there's always going to be someone who does not like something. People are not monolithic. That is what it is. But I would hope that our families understand that we have the best interest of our students in mind and in heart. And we would never do anything that we thought would be damaging to our students. So that is just what it is. Someone says, you mentioned curriculum. Is there a curriculum plan to roll? This is a great opportunity for a public service announcement from the DEI office. So I did not come here with a curriculum and say, here, everybody, this is what we're teaching about diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's not how that works. There's a whole curriculum process through the Indiana Department of Education, and they have standards that they must meet for every grade level. And well beyond my knowledge, I would have to read up on some of that, right? My background is not K through 12. So understanding that there is a very robust and rigorous process in things like textbook adoption and curriculum being built. We have, I mentioned her earlier, Anna Royo is our Director of Curriculum and Instruction. If you have questions about what is going on in your child's classroom, please do not hesitate to reach out to your child's teacher, to your child's principal in the buildings, and to Ann at the ESC, and they will all be more than happy to let you know what your child is learning when it comes to the standards from the Indiana Department of Education and how they're going about doing that. So that is a myth that is going around rampantly on good old social media. That is not true. So I appreciate the opportunity to clear that up. Please, 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 I cannot stress more enough that do not believe things that you read on social media. Okay, there's a lot of things posted on social media and 99.9% of them are incorrect. We do not use critical race theory as our school curriculum. That is that's just not what we do. But that is a very rampant thing that's on social media all the time. If you have questions, we are more than happy to ask them, but please reach out. Principals would love to talk to you. Curriculum and instruction would love to talk to you. We have a lot of things going on in the chat. That kind of falls under that. What kind of words can we use to signal that the setting is safe for them to be heard? That's an interesting question. I think you have to in my perspective, you have to kind of lay out the kind of ground rules. So that is up to the teacher in the classroom to kind of create that environment of having conversations. And for me as a trainer, when I go into trainings, I create that kind of from the beginning. And as Lindsay, I think it was talked earlier about trust and building that trust, right? And that is that's very, very key, because people are not going to open up and share at that level if they do not have that trust. What does the panel think?
Yeah, I think, that's certainly a huge part of it. I think even just the physical environment of your classroom, do you have representation of different people, different groups on your walls in the classroom? Just even something as setting the physical environment of your classroom can send a large message to a student when they walk in as to what kind of space this is. Is it a safe space where I can feel represented, where my voice can be honored and heard? So I think, building those emotional and personal connections is big, but I think just, again, being very cognizant of what's on the walls in your room, and things like that helps create an environment that could maybe help a student feel a little bit more welcomed or safe or willing to broach certain conversations.
I would also say, like, in terms of just like, when you like start your class, like kind of like when you like first, when students like first come in, like just like open it up and be like, hey, this class we're gonna have like discussions, and this is kind of like a safe space for you guys to talk about what you guys want to talk about. But then also with that, like make sure that you're not like, I would say, like, make sure you have like limits to it. Like make sure, like you're saying, like if someone does say something that's like racist or homophobic, like make sure to call them out about it, because, and just educate them on it. Because I also feel like that's important in keeping a safe space. Because I remember I had one teacher, we always do like discussions in class. And this one boy said something that was like really rude about like Michelle Obama. And he like, it was really racist. And like my one teacher called him out for that, because he was saying like, oh, like, what do you feel about Michelle Obama, like, looking like a man, with like, being a dark-skinned woman, like the, a lot of people think we're more masculine than that term. And so I was just, he said that, and our teacher kind of like called him out about that. And he kind of made sure to keep that safe space going for us to talk about whatever we want. So like, even with that teacher, I still talk about different Black issues, and I feel comfortable with that. And we still talk about different issues like that go on in our community.
I have a question in the chat about implicit bias. So as a part of our summer trainings, we will be having a session over core concepts and implicit bias. So we will be offering that to employees over the summer. I'm not sure what self-denial, well, it's kind of hard to say if somebody else has self-denial. So I'm not sure I'm following that exactly. So if you give me a little more context, we will try to answer that as well. But I will say that, everybody has implicit bias, right? We all have them. So that means you as a parent or a caregiver, teachers, administrators, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, we all have implicit bias. So part of the work that needs to be done is self-reflective, right? So we need to work on ourselves and discover our biases so that we can try to interrupt those patterns so that they don't negatively affect our students and our colleagues and our families and things like that. So that is definitely a core, and I think it's really, really important for all of us to do. And I think we all have to realize that we all have implicit biases. And the number one thing we can do is work to unpack that. And it is work. It's work you have to do. You have to be willing and honest and open and able to do that work, and you can't see yourself as perfect or an expert, or you won't be able to adequately do that work. But implicit bias it is real and it's important. All right, we're having such good discussion, and we said we weren't going to be able to get through all these questions, but I'm just glad that we have a lot of chat questions as well. So I definitely want to try to get as many of them as possible too. How do you think we can better learn to understand and respect differences? What do you think we can do to try to do that?
Well, I think we've talked about it a little bit. We've talked about acknowledging difference. And I think, a few minutes ago, I talked about, not calling out a student who may be different until you've had a conversation, as the teacher or educator. But I think, finding members of a particular community, even if it's not somebody, a student in that classroom at that moment, to share their experience, to share their lived experience, does a lot. The Jewish community has a program where we've trained Jewish teens to go into classrooms where there might not be any Jewish students and talk about what it's like to be Jewish. And it's really powerful, not just for the students who walk away saying, well, now I see that there isn't just one type of Jewish person. That must be, there's not just one type of Black person. There's not one type of Muslim person. There's diversity within these communities too. And it's important for the Jewish students who stand and talk to their peers to learn how to articulate what their identity means to them. That part has to come too. I can sit here and say I'm ready to learn and I'm ready to do the work and I'm ready to listen, but I also need somebody who can enter that conversation with me, ready to articulate their experience. And so there's a lot of learning that has to go on in both directions. And I find myself going back to one of the questions in the chat about, what do you do if a parent, this could really upset a parent. And as a parent, as I know many of us on this panel are, if one of my kids comes home and says, you would not believe this conversation we had in class today, I find myself asking, what was the atmosphere like in the room? Was your teacher trying to make space for somebody to speak? And do you feel like, if it was you, do you feel like you were given that space? Was there listening involved? And on the other, and then like what Morgan said a minute ago, there are going to be some things that are said where it needs to be interrupted. The students are all going to be watching and they need to see the teacher step up and say, that's inappropriate, or that's a problem for this reason. So I have so much respect for what teachers have to navigate in any given day in your classroom, and get all of the content taught and be ready to have conversations that could be really beautiful, but could also feel really scary. And so for my kids, I want them to come away feeling like they can have a difficult conversation and it'll be okay. It'll be okay, and they'll learn, and maybe somebody else learned a little something too.
I'm not sure if this relates to your question, Terry, but Lindsay said something that made me think about something else. As an educator, I know this might be difficult, is like releasing power, like knowing that you may not know or be the expert in the room on that topic. And that's okay. And to let students know, hey, I'm learning with you, I'm growing with you, and that you actually might be the expert in the room. And if that person wants to step up and speak to that, then that's fine. If they don't, then that's fine as well. But just releasing that power dynamic and getting on the same space and level with your students is just really important. And it really allows them to come up and to like their potential to say, well, I do know this and I am empowered by this. And thank you for giving me that space to speak and say what I want to say if they choose to say so.
I kind of had two thoughts. after everyone's talked. One of them is that I think it's important for us to respect each other's experiences, because we can learn so much from what other people go through and how they experience things. You know, we all have our own differences, our own implicit biases, our own privileges. And so if we are open and willing to listen to other people's experiences, we can just learn so much. And then we can go do our own research and build our knowledge so that we can have more impactful conversations. And also, I think it's kind of important, and I had this thought earlier when we talked about behavior too, but our silence tells us just as much as what we say does. So if there are things happening in the classroom, especially as teachers, that we don't acknowledge and we don't talk about, or we don't say things, we're sending a message just as clearly as when we do talk about things. So I feel like it's really important to take in people's experiences and not dismiss those because we don't have them personally. But also be willing to know that our silence and saying, hey, I don't know how that feels, but I want to learn more so that I can help you. Or I don't feel like that was right, but tell me more about how you feel. And just having that real raw openness to not know and to be willing to learn, I think is really important for us to acknowledge our differences and really work together to build capacity to talk and build a safe community.
Yeah, I think those are great points. I think you hit the nail on the head on both those. And I'd also say too, understanding like how the forces of socialization impact us and the views we develop in society. I think there's very little in mainstream society that actually teaches us to promote and value and understand diversity. When I look at even like the film industry and media today and how much of an impact that has on the views, beliefs, values we develop. And that's an industry that still is like many parts of society, overwhelmingly dominated by white males and who shape the images of women on screen and things like that. So I think just being aware too of how different factors that influence socialization in our culture play a role in the beliefs we develop, and being reflective on that is important too.
All right, we are at 4:55 already. Can you believe it? So I want to leave a few minutes at the end for each of our panelists to leave anything that they just think is really important as we begin to engage and dive deeper into diversity, equity, and inclusion work at CCS and in Carmel in general. Just some words that you would like to share with our audience today. I will start with Tyson Smith.
Okay, I'm kind of piggyback off what everybody else said, but I think it's important to immerse yourself into other communities and other events or whatnot. And so I don't want this to sound like a stereotype, but when I go to a sporting event, I don't expect every person there in the audience to be straight. So if you go to an LGBTQ event, don't expect to walk in and think that you're the only straight person there, kind of thing. People go and immerse themselves in other different cultures and things. And so that's what I would say is go out and experience things that are outside of your box, and go to things and, try them out. I remember I took a diversity class in college, which was 20 some years ago, and we had to do different things like that and go and experience and immerse ourselves in different cultures and events. And it was very eye-opening, and I really appreciate it still to this day.
Morgan?
I guess one thing that I have to say is just that you just have to basically just put yourself out there and be open to those conversations, I would say. And just make sure that you're incorporating those conversations into your classroom. Even if you're a science or math or language teacher, it doesn't really matter. Just make sure to incorporate those conversations in there, because you can always find a way to incorporate something about students of color in your classroom, or just talking about historical figures who are of color in your classroom. And then also I would say just make sure to have those courageous conversations, and because sometimes kids aren't getting those at home, and those are not emphasized at home, talking about things you shouldn't say, or what you should be doing and how you can help. Those aren't really emphasized at home. And so I would say just make sure to emphasize those at school and just be a leader and continue to do that.
Thank you. Shandy?
I would just encourage everyone to do as much research as they can, and it doesn't have to be reading books. There are just so many ways to learn about different communities and different people and listening to, their experiences. And I encourage everyone to put themselves in uncomfortable positions, because that's where we're going to find the most growth, is to put ourselves in these uncomfortable spots so that we can all find our own voices to make this work possible.
James?
Yeah, so I would just say, obviously, as a history teacher, I think learning the history of oppression in this country is incredibly important to understanding our present today. If we don't learn our history, you're pretty much a leaf that doesn't know it's part of a tree. And I think, we really need to, as a country, educate ourselves and people in our community on the history of that oppression to better understand exactly the issues we're facing today, because they didn't just come out of nowhere. And then the other thing I would just say is making sure to be active. Like we said before, if you're not being active and part of the solution, then you're kind of complicit in the continuation of inequity or a lack of inclusion. And so those are the couple things: really knowing your history and being an active part of the solution, because we can all give back in some way, no matter how big or how small, and help progress DEI work.
Brittany?
I would say that knowing that it will not always be easy. There will be hard times, but it will be so worth it for us to form those relationships and do the hard work that will really pay off. When we think about living in Carmel, we live here, we moved here, we work here for a reason. And it's because of that sense of community that is in Carmel. And when I think about the word community, I think about feeling supported and appreciated and loved, and having people that you can rely on, and having that village to help to raise you, even if you're an adult and you're still learning, or help you with your children, and just being open to being able to do that work, and knowing that throughout your journey, you'll be able to support other people, but also being open to just being raw and real, and being able to find your people that you can share your feelings with and do the work to be able to educate yourself as well.
And Lindsay, I believe you haven't gone yet.
Well, ditto to everything. I really enjoyed and appreciated this conversation and being invited into it. I learn every conversation I have, and so whether it's putting yourself in an environment that you wouldn't naturally be in, or asking to have a conversation that you normally wouldn't have, or reading something on your
She froze. Okay, maybe she'll pop back in a second. In the chat, I have put the assessment link. Please take a few moments to fill that out as we wait a few seconds to see if Lindsay unfreezes. I would just say that my parting words would be to, let your guard down, have some trust in your educators. Part of what I do is to help to train our teachers so that they can give their best to your students. And if you have any questions, please feel free. We have a whole team of people that work on curriculum. We have a whole team of people who are responsible for teacher professional development and training. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out directly to the school system. Okay, Lindsay, you're back. Go ahead.
No, it was just me saying, just go out and try and learn, and be vulnerable in your learning, and curious, and a thank you. Really a thank you for hosting the conversation, and for everybody taking an hour out of their day to watch us navigate through it.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I will leave it open for a few minutes so that people can make sure to grab that link. I'll keep putting it back in there as the chat goes and rolls up. And thank you everybody for coming out and joining us this evening. Appreciate it.